Good evening, everyone. Welcome. Yes, it is the second Wednesday of the month, and it is also on our Western calendar, Buddha's Enlightenment Day. So I don't know if we say Happy Buddha's Enlightenment Day or not, but it seems to flow. But I was talking to a friend of mine who's another Zen master, and I was telling them that on this second Wednesday of the month, I give the Dharma talk myself, and it happens to be Buddhist Enlightenment Day. And they said, "Oh boy, I don't like to do that. That's too much pressure. I like questions. Then I know I can just answer the question." And the reason I'm saying that is that I tend to feel at a night like tonight, there's even more pressure. And you all know I'm not a Buddhist scholar, I'm a Buddhist practitioner. So I am going to talk some about Buddhist enlightenment and Buddhist Enlightenment Day. But remember, this is not a scholarly talk. This is a practice talk. And honestly, to me, at this point in my life and in my practice, the main inspiration that I get from Buddhist enlightenment has to do with practice. The Buddha went through a lot before his enlightenment, and he went through a lot after his enlightenment. And he always had to continue to practice. And I even honestly feel there's a problem with this idea of getting enlightenment. Because we all have this idea, I know I did certainly when I came into practice, all those many years ago, that I would get something and then I would be enlightened. We get enlightenment and then we become enlightened. And it's all conceptual and it's all fantasy. I do have to admit, though, that when I met Zen Master Bon Soeng, for me, he fit the model that I had as an enlightened person. He was so alive and had so much energy, and that drew me more into the practice. But Zen Master Bon Soeng was not a perfect individual who always did the right thing. You know, I'd have to say my fantasy would have been I would have gotten enlightenment, and then forevermore I would be enlightened. I would never make a mistake. I'd always know what to do in any situation, and I'd always be correct because, of course, an enlightened person is a perfect person. And I have to admit, the longer I've been involved in practice, the farther away that fantasy seems to be. I've known too many practitioners, too many teachers who were not perfect, that did make mistakes, and really, that's more interesting. The conceptual fantasy of being some perfect being actually is a cardboard figure. It's the creation of Buddha as this object that is really, like I say, a cardboard figure, not a fully fleshed human being. So when I started thinking about this talk, in many ways, almost simultaneously, I also was aware that December 8th is also the anniversary of the killing of John Lennon. And if I'm not mistaken, I think today is 40 years. I think it was 1981. And my thought was, so it's Buddha's Enlightenment, December 8th, it's Buddha's Enlightenment Day, and it's also John Lennon's murder day. Is it a good day or a bad day? Each one of us makes that determination. And then I realized that in my neighborhood, December 8th is also the grand opening of Whole Foods. Is that good or is that bad? Now, honestly, I don't shop much at Whole Foods, so it's kind of neutral for me. If there's anything I'm concerned about, it's the traffic at the corner that I pass almost every day that I'm driving. So is it good or it's bad? I had a friend once who lived in an area that there was no Trader Joe's, and she only wanted Trader Joe's. And in my neighborhood, I've been shopping at Trader Joe's now for probably 20 years, and I shop there, but it's no big deal. So as we say, mind makes everything. And even this story about the Buddha, it's a story. There seems to be a historical record of the Buddha actually living. And so we can even imagine that there was this man who we now call the Buddha. I guess in the early days, before he was the Buddha, he was Gautama. And his father was a king. And the story goes that when he was born, there was a prophecy revealed to his father that he was either going to be a great political leader or a great religious figure. His father wanted a political leader. He did not at all want a religious figure. So in my version of this story, his father put him in a cage. It was a velvet cage. It was I saw one reference, they called it a pleasure palace. All of his desires, all of his needs, and all of his curiosity was squashed by all that he was given. In my version of the story, the important point was that this young boy was lied to. He was taught and told the world was a way that it really wasn't. And he embraced that world, the sensual world, the world of desire. But by his late 20s, he was getting antsy. He was starting to have a feeling that as beautiful as this cage was, it was still a cage. And where in the early days it was just his pleasure, by the time he was in the late 20s, he had a wife and a young child. But something was not right. Every one of us sitting here tonight on this Zoom session, I guess we call it, we know that feeling. We wouldn't be here without some recognition that what we've been told isn't really so, or what we've gotten doesn't really satisfy some deep urge. So apparently the story goes that he had his attendant take him out of the palace, where, as ridiculous as this may seem, he never left. Because his father lied to him by pretending that it was this magnificent, beautiful world. So what was hidden from him was the reality of suffering, the reality of old age, the reality of sickness, the reality of death. And actually, in my version of the story, is a part that I apparently added to myself, is that he also came to witness that there was poverty in the world, that not everybody lived in a velvet cage, that there was deep, deep, deep suffering in the world. And this moved him. This moved him so much that he jumped over the wall and he escaped the cage. All of us, one way or another, we have to jump over the wall. Not only do we have to recognize that there's suffering, but we have to take a jump to do something about it. The idea is not enough. We have to do something about it. And that really is the beauty of Buddha's enlightenment. because he offered us something to do about our suffering. Not ideology, not belief, but actually do something. So the Buddha left. He split. He left his wife. He left his child. In our modern view of things, that's about the worst thing that you can do. He was a deadbeat dad. Now, fortunately, the wife and child stayed in the palace. I keep getting this mixed up, temple and palace. It's an interesting mistake I keep making. But they stayed in the palace, so I suppose their needs were going to be taken care of. But he didn't understand responsibility. He didn't really understand anything, perhaps, except that he had this itch. Something was wrong, and he needed to do something about it. So he jumped. For me, my jump was getting into a car and going somewhere where I didn't know where I was going and ending up 3,000 miles from home where I knew nobody. There was a marker, a jump. I was young. That was my life at that time. I graduated college. It was time to move on. So in a way, for the time in my life, it was an easy jump, but I had to go against all the wishes of my parents. I had to leave everything behind and not knowing where I was going or what I was going to get. So I don't mean to over-dramatize my story, but I think each one of us has some way you can touch into. How did you make the jump? You realize the problem. And to solve the problem, you have to change. I've been working in the change business for 40 years now. Change is very difficult. We tend to go back to our stuck place. I often tell the story about the dancing bear that needs the food and can't find the food in the forest, so comes back to their cage so that they can survive. And many, many, many people who start on the journey of practice turn back. The lure of their traditional life, or the lure of the desire and their need for material nourishment, it draws them back. And that's okay. Everybody has their own life path. But when the Buddha jumped over the wall, he went out into the forest. And that was the path of spiritual seekers in those days. So he followed something of a path that everybody else was following. But he had a problem. Nothing was working. The way the story goes, he was the best student. He could master every technique better than anybody else could. But it didn't matter. It wasn't his way, and it didn't work for him. So he had to persevere. So in those days, the conceptual philosophical view was that spirituality and worldliness were at odds with each other. And there was a belief that in order to awaken the spiritual, you had to almost kill the physical. Of course, you couldn't go too far because you kill the body and then you're done. But the mendicants would almost starve themselves. Maybe you've seen the picture or the sculpture of the Buddha where you can see his ribs and all the flesh, all the fat is gone, all the meat on his body is gone, and all that's left is skin and bones. Because he was following the way of awakening the spiritual. But it didn't work. So I went back to this biography of the Buddha by Karen Armstrong. I don't know if many of you have seen it. I haven't gotten all the way through, but it's quite interesting. And she tells a story that I had never heard before. And so I went back today to look for it. And of course, what I found was notes from a talk that I probably gave about 15 years ago at the Providence Zen Center for a Buddha's Enlightenment Day ceremony. So it's very helpful because it gives me something to read from rather than reading from the book. So the Buddha had starved himself. He was miserable. He finally realized he'd hit a dead end. He didn't know what to do. And then he had a memory. He remembered something that happened when he was like 5 or 6 years old. His father had taken him to, I guess what's called a yearly field plowing ceremony. It was a beautiful day, and the whole community came out for this celebration. And he was with his nurse or his caretaker, but the caretaker got swept up into the excitement of the day, and he was left alone. And at this point in his life, as a 5 or 6 year old, the story goes, it was like the first time he'd ever just been left alone. So you can hear the metaphor. We're always being bombarded by everybody else's ideas and opinions. I'm bombarding you with mine right now. And in that, especially now in our world of computers and media, we're bombarded. It's like a cacophony of ideas and opinions and beliefs, and we're just in this cyclone of all of this, and how hard it is to find ourselves. And in many ways, you can say that the Buddha's enlightenment, or enlightenment in general, is a process of finding ourselves. We talk so much about true self, true nature, Buddha nature. All of this is really about finding our own way, not my truth, your truth. What is it? When we raise great doubt, it's not great doubt to figure out what the teacher says so you can say that. What's your experience? How hard it is to just experience our own experience and to believe ourselves. So the Buddha was left, this young boy, before he was the Buddha, was left all by himself. And he was left alone under this rose apple tree. And the way the story goes, he spontaneously sat in the lotus posture, and he entered the first jhana of concentration. And in that moment, he felt joy. And when he remembered this story, he realized, I don't need to kill myself to allow my spiritual nature to appear. Rather than fighting human nature, I can embrace human nature. And rather than killing to achieve enlightenment, perhaps it's possible that compassion and love and care can be part of this enlightenment. And that memory awoke in him. And then, of course, the way the story goes, any good story goes, at that moment, a young girl came by offering milk. So from this realization, he drank some milk. He got caught, he got busted by his friends. And they left him all by himself. They turned their back on him because he forgot that he needed to kill the body, but it seemed that he was embracing the body. So everybody left, and he sat down, and he said, now I'm going to find my way. And he sat, and he sat, and he sat. And of course, the story goes on the early morning of the 8th day of the 12th month, which of course, if you go by the lunar calendar, it's a whole different day. But on the 8th day, the morning of the 8th day of the 12th month, with a mind totally clear and open, he looked up and he saw the morning star. He saw Venus. Everything opened up. And what did he discover? Well, whatever he discovered on his own, we'll never know. But what he spoke about were the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path. And that's where I want to lead us to. And I'm not even going to spend much time with the Four Noble Truths. I think you know it. Life is unsatisfactory. Desire is the cause of this unsatisfactoriness. There is a way out of this unsatisfactoriness. And the way out is the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path. And I just want to spend a little time talking about the Eightfold Path. I know everybody knows something about it. We all have some idea about it. I have to go back to the books to know exactly what each of the folds of the Eightfold Path are. But the main point I want to make about the Eightfold Path is that it's a program. It's a practice. The Buddha laid out a practice for us, that if we follow this practice and we actually do it, that we also can wake up. And now I'd like to say, not in a cardboard cutout way or a child's fantasy way, but in a human way, a real life way of dealing with all of, the vicissitudes of life. Just when you think you know what's going to happen, something hits you at the back of the head and you're dealing with something else. So if we stay stuck in our idea of what enlightenment is, or even what practice is, this moment arrives and we're not prepared because we're stuck in a rigid idea rather than being open, ready, and available for what the moment brings us. So our practice, I don't think, is about trying to be perfect. Our practice is about opening us and teaching us through trial and error to be open and ready. And maybe I'd even throw in resilient. We're always getting knocked down. Again, in my young man's fantasy, once you get it, you're never knocked down again. But you know, one of my favorite stories about the Buddha and his early days in the Sangha was that the Buddha decided that there could only be men in the Sangha. The women weren't allowed. The story goes that he believed that if women were allowed in the Sangha, and in those days that meant the monastic Sangha, that Buddhism would disappear from the world 500 years before it would have if women were kept out. Well, one of the things that doesn't hold up to me in the Buddha's story is that, well, first of all, if you go to the Buddha's birth, He didn't come through his mother's vaginal canal. He popped out of her hip. So there's already something wrong with this story. He's not human. He's something else. But if you humanize the story, 7 days later, his mother died from complications of childbirth. So right then, indelibly embedded in his being was suffering. His aunt stepped in and raised him. And years later, well after his enlightenment, his aunt wanted to join the Sangha. And the Buddha said, no, 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 no women are allowed. But she raised him. She said, you're full of shit, Buddha. Your idea is stupid. And you're making a mockery of all of this highfalutin teaching that you're giving. And because she was his aunt, she could get away with it. And she kept at it. She didn't take no for an answer. So he relented. I don't know, maybe he was right. And the Buddha way will disappear from this world 500 years earlier. I can't tell you whether he was right or wrong, but I personally just love the fact that he was told he was full of shit, and eventually he gave in. So he wasn't perfect, although you can make a better case for his perfection because he listened, right? So we can make any story we want. So I like this story. She got through to him. So the Buddha could change. So, and if you look at the eightfold path, the first fold, which I've heard includes everything else, is right view. And right view really means no view. If you attach to any view, you're already making a mistake. Each moment arises with its own causes and conditions. How will we meet that moment? We learn things, and that learning helps bring us to this moment. But the moment of arising is the time to let go and without prejudgment, meet the moment. This part of the story always reminds me of the Stanislavski method of acting, where when you're practicing for a part, you delve so deeply into the character. You write pages and pages understanding who the character is. Why would they react the way you're reacting in the play? And when you get on stage, you throw that all away and you interact with the moment as it is. You've been prepared for the moment. Now you act, not out of your concepts. You act in an alive way that the circumstances provide for you. Life happens because these causes and conditions come together in this particular moment. So right view means meet this moment. And if I've been told that when you attain right view, you've got all the rest of the eightfold path taken care of. The very first retreat I ever sat, a 7-day retreat that I ever sat, was with a teacher named Soen Roshi. He was a Japanese man who was the teacher of Ada Roshi in New York, and a very alive and dynamic man. And at one point in the retreat, he said, you know, if you can just answer the mu koan, I'll give you the answers to all the other ones. I don't have time to waste on all this. Just break through your conceptual framework. Be present right now. That's what matters. And again, now you're getting my view, but that's practice. So we start off with right view, and then we go to right thought. Zen Master Bon Soeng says, right thought means don't be attached to thoughts. Don't be attached to your concepts and ideas that arise in the mind. And if we can do that, then we're here. We can use things, but again, we're always talking with this image of a prison. Eileen told us this wonderful story and gave us this beautiful metaphor of her thoughts created the bars of the prison. And if we can let go enough, there is no prison. If we're not attached to our thoughts and concepts and ideas, the prison's gone. But that scares us. If the prison is gone, then we're exposed. Then we're responsible. If we're in prison, we can blame the prison keepers. Well, I just was taught wrong. But if we really want to be out of the prison, then there's nothing to hide behind. And I know even now, the thought of coming to you and giving this Buddha's Enlightenment Day talk, it's like I'm totally exposed. All of your judgments can come. Some of you probably know the story better than I do. And you might think, he's crazy. He's just making up another story. So to reveal yourself is to be exposed. And to practice is to work with that exposure. I'm not saying it's easy. And I'm not even saying you should rip your chest open before you're ready. But practice means try. Expose, step back, regroup, expose again, step back, lick your wounds, take care of yourself, and come back. In Zen, we say, fall down 7 times, get up 8 times. Do it. It's not idea, it's action. So right view and right thought give us a stance, an intention, a way of meeting the world. And then the eightfold path goes into right speech, right action, and right livelihood. Sometimes these are called ethics. I find myself in my daily life. How do I live? What am I doing? How does my tongue, as we say in the temple rules, how does my tongue lead me to ruin? Our speech can be so powerful, and our speech can be so hurtful. And in carelessness and unconsciousness, we can say and do things that make the world a much worse place to live in. And remember, the Buddha realized that night before he got enlightened that love, compassion, charity, open-heartedness is the way. But how many times my speech, my behavior undermine that and wound and destroy. Now remember, this isn't a view of perfection. It's practice. So we notice, we work with it. When I open my mouth and I say the wrong thing, I've got to accept that. I got to work with it. It's not easy. But unless I'm willing to admit it and work with it, I'm sure very likely to do it again. So watch your speech, watch your behavior. And what are you doing with your life? Yeah, part of that question is, does this life bring, my livelihood, does it bring me joy? Does it bring me enough money? Does it bring what I need? That's one, and that's important. But what else? Who am I, what and who am I harming by my behavior? When Zen Master Bon Soeng writes about this, he talks about killing animals. And he kind of mentions that as a bad livelihood. I don't think he uses those words. But then I remember in Tibet, somebody has to kill the animals. And I don't know if I'm making this part up, but sometimes they're called a karma eater. They take on the karma for all the rest of the community. I'll do the bad thing, and I'll take the consequences for everybody else's well-being. Well, is that right livelihood or not? I don't know. Nobody can say, really. What does it say in the morning bell chant? Nobody can say, and nobody can say it's opposite. We don't know. That's practice. But each one of us has to find it out for ourselves. And then the last three have to do with effort. Practice itself. Effort, right mindfulness, and right meditation. For right meditation, Zen Master Bon Soeng says, keep a don't know mind moment to moment. It's not about sitting in the right posture on this cushion. It's about how do you keep your mind moment to moment. Right mindfulness, pay attention. What really is it? And in right mindfulness, we have the doorway to embodiment. Practice isn't some intellectual concept. Practice is embodied. We feel it. We experience it. We are what we think of as our own individuality is the doorway, is the Dharma gate. So be mindful. Embody it. Don't go upstairs into transcendence and conception. Come back down into your body. How does it feel? Because if you know how it feels, you'll get a sense about how it might feel to someone else. And if you don't like it when somebody treats you a certain way, you can be pretty sure they're not going to like it either. So as you learn from your own body, your own embodiment, that leads to wisdom. And wisdom and compassion are the two-headed dragon of enlightenment. What am I doing right now? How do I take that wisdom and compassion and offer it? So I see I've gone a long time. I want to end. I use this poem by Mangang every year. If you come to retreat next Saturday, not this coming Saturday, but the next one, you're likely to hear it in the interview room if you're doing Kangans. Those of you who've been sitting together with us for a long time, you've done it before, you've probably forgotten. But I want to end by reading Poem for Buddha's Enlightenment Day by Zen Master Mangang. The Buddha saw a star, got enlightenment. Mangang saw a star, lost enlightenment. December 8th, hup, explodes, got and lost. In the snow, plum flowers one by one are red. So is it a good day or a bad day? Ha! No good, no bad. It's 8:20, and I've now finished my speech.